Hey there. Tonight, we are stepping into a room where the floor is cold. The lamp is expensive. The walls remember smoke. And even waking up feels like work. You open your eyes in 1880 America, and the first thing you understand is not comfort, but limit. Light is thin. Heat is borrowed. The mattress beneath you is packed with straw or horsehair and has the personality of an irritated fence. If this ordinary morning teaches you anything, it is that history did not happen only in battlefields or grand halls. It happened here, in dim rooms, in stiff clothes, in cold water, in breakfasts eaten quickly before the body was sent back out to earn its keep. So, if you enjoy these quiet journeys into the past, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Then let the room grow a little darker around you. Let your shoulders fall. Let your jaw unclench and settle in with me as we step softly into a day that millions of people once lived without ever imagining that anyone far in the future would want to lie awake and listen to it. You do not wake to a bright clock or a cheerful melody. You wake because the world insists. A rooster has opinions. A wagon wheel out on the road gives a long wooden groan. Somewhere in the house, or beyond it, a board answers with a creak of its own, as though the building has bones and woke up a few minutes before you did. You lie still for a moment, not because the bed is luxurious, but because rising too quickly means meeting the cold too quickly, and there is wisdom in postponing that small shock for one more breath. The room is dim in a way that feels almost careful. Dawn comes through the window, but the glass is imperfect, handmade, slightly warped. So the world outside seems to bend a little, as if it has not quite decided what shape to take this morning. The frame does not fit perfectly. Air finds its way in. Weather always does. In winter, that means the room can feel sharp enough to wake every joint before your mind has properly returned. In summer, it means the heat enters early and sits with you like an uninvited relative who has every intention of staying. You breathe in and catch the smell that has lived here longer than you have been awake. Smoke. Not fresh smoke exactly. Not the bright scent of a flame newly coaxed to life. This is yesterday's smoke, or last week's, or perhaps the accumulated breath of many winters. It clings to cloth, wood, curtains, blankets. Here, honestly, I have always found that one of the strangest truths about older lives is how much the air itself belonged to labor. In our world, a room can smell like lavender or detergent, or nothing at all. Here, the room smells like heat that had to be made by hand. You turn slightly, and the mattress answers with a tired rustle. It is lumpy in places and flattened in others. Straw settles where bodies settle. Horsehair shifts but does not really forgive. Comfort is present, but it has conditions. That is the phrase that keeps returning when you stand inside this world. Everything useful has conditions. Warmth, if you have fuel. Cleanliness, if you have time and water. Rest, if the day has not taken too much from your body. Privacy, if the house is large enough, and often it is not. You push the blanket back, and the air finds your skin at once. Your feet reach carefully toward the floorboards. They are cool even in mild weather, and in colder months, they can feel almost personal in their disapproval. Shoes wait nearby. They are not decorative. They are not lined in rows with many cheerful alternatives. They are simply there, already bent to the shape of repeated use, carrying yesterday's dust at the seams. Some household inventories from the period list shoes alongside tools rather than garments, and that makes a certain heart sense. These are not expressions of taste. They are equipment for enduring the day. When you stand, your body tells you what happened yesterday. Shoulders remember carrying. Hands remember gripping. The back remembers bending. Knees give you a little report of the previous afternoon, whether you requested that report or not. Rest here is practical. It is not a plush little kingdom built to flatter your exhaustion. It is a repair interval, just long enough to send you out again. You cross the room toward the washstand. The basin sits where it always sits, chipped a little, dulled by years of use, patient in the way objects become when they have no choice. Water waits in it, still and cold. You look at it, and there is a tiny pause, the sort of pause people do not write in official records, but absolutely live through. The human hesitation before cold water is one of our great unifying experiences. Some things change. Some things remain embarrassingly eternal. You dip your fingers first. The shock is quick. Then your palms. Then the water to your face. It bites just enough to drag the rest of you awake. There is no button to press for warmth. No hot stream arrives obediently from somewhere beyond the wall. Heating water takes fuel, time, attention, and morning rarely offers all three in generous amounts. So the cold becomes part of readiness. You stop resisting it, and it becomes more tolerable. That, too, is part of this life. Discomfort does not disappear. You simply learn where to put it. A towel hangs nearby, rough with air drying, a little stiff at the edges. Soap sits on the stand, homemade or locally bought, smelling faintly of lye and animal fat. It cleans. It also reminds you that cleanliness in this world is practical, not decorative. Full bathing is another matter entirely. Heating enough water, finding privacy, making time. None of these things happen casually. People in 1880 bathe less often than most modern people would consider ideal. Not because they are foolish or careless, but because the process is a small campaign. It has to be worth the effort. You lift your head and look into the glass. The mirror is not cruel, but it is honest. Light is weak, yet enough. The face looking back at you already carries weather. Lines come early when sun, wind, labor, and worry are regular visitors. Skin is not protected from life here. Life writes on it directly. As you dress, the room fills slowly with the sounds of others waking. A cough through a wall. A baby crying once, then stopping. A soft footstep overhead or next door, and depending on the kind of house you live in. Thin walls change the meaning of silence. Privacy here is not created by architecture so much as by mutual restraint. People learn when not to comment, when to lower voices, when to turn away. It is a polite choreography built because there is no other reliable system. You pull on underclothes first. Linen, cotton, something plain, something washable, something meant to stand between skin and the heavier outer fabric. Then the rest. Wool, if available, warm but scratchy. Cotton, where trade and money allow it. Layers chosen not for fashion first, but for durability, modesty, protection. You do not stand over a wide array of options wondering what suits your mood. Mood is not consulted. Weather is consulted. Work is consulted. Availability is consulted. Your shirt or dress or work clothes are part of an agreement between your body and the day ahead. A button is missing from one cuff, and you notice it immediately. A seam at the side has been repaired. The patch is neat. Whoever did it knew what they were doing. Repair is not an embarrassment here. It is evidence that someone intends this garment to keep serving. In fact, I think one of the quietest misunderstandings people have about the past is that patched things signify only poverty. Sometimes they signify care. Sometimes they signify intelligence. Sometimes they simply signify that cloth was too valuable to abandon over one stubborn little tear. You sit to pull on your shoes and feel their weight settle around your feet. The leather is stiff in places, softened in others, marked by weather and use. Breaking in new shoes is miserable. Keeping old shoes alive is a skill. Soles are repaired, laces replaced, heels reinforced. People walk long distances in these. They work in them, stand in them, carry in them. Bad shoes can make the whole day meaner than it needs to be. When you finally straighten, fully dressed now, the room has changed slightly. Dawn has strengthened. The light reaching through the warped glass falls across the floor in a shape that would be beautiful if it were not also an instruction. Daylight means the clock has started whether you are ready or not. Artificial light exists, yes, but it is dim, expensive, and not the kind of thing you waste by pretending morning has not yet arrived. Outside, America in 1880 is restless. Railroads cut across the continent. Factories thicken city air. Towns rise and disappear. Newspapers carry stories of industry, inventions, expansion, dispute. Yet inside this room, the morning still begins with the body, with water, with fabric, with the condition of the weather sneaking in through the window frame. That is what makes this period feel so strange and so human. One foot is already in the machine age. The other still stands firmly in a world governed by wood smoke and daylight. You move toward the doorway and pause there for a breath. There is a subtle tension in the atmosphere of this decade, though people living it may not have named it so cleanly. Some scholars argue the 1880s felt clearly transitional. that people sense the old rhythms thinning and the new ones arriving. Others think change came so gradually that most simply felt they were living the same hard life with a few new tools nearby. It is probably both. Human beings are very good at living through revolutions by calling them Tuesday, the hallway, or the next room, or the shared space beyond your door is cooler than you hoped and busier than you expected. Someone is already moving with purpose. Someone else is stirring a pot. A child slips past with the serious concentration of a small person trusted with a real task. The house has begun its day in earnest. No one announces this. The house itself announces it through motion, smell, and the faint urgency that sits in every useful room. You pass a window and glance out. If you are in a city, the street is already shaping itself into noise. Horses, carts, voices, distant machinery, all arriving in layers. If you are in the country, the soundscape is thinner, but no less insistent. Wind through grass, chickens scratching, a gate tapping lightly where it has not been latched well enough. Either way, the world beyond the walls is already working, and there is a feeling you meet everywhere in this era that idleness is dangerous, not merely sinful in some vague sermon-soaked way, though religion certainly has views. Dangerous in the practical sense. Fall behind and the day does not wait. Fall behind often enough and life grows sharp around you. As you step fully into the morning, you realize something that people in the future often miss when they think about the past. History does not live mainly in the grand speech or the battlefield charge or the photograph of a famous face. History lives here, in this quiet choreography of waking, in the basin with cold water, in the shoe repaired one more time, in the body already tired before breakfast, in the air that smells like yesterday's fire, because without that fire there might not have been a morning at all. And that is where this day truly begins, not with spectacle, but with repetition, with the millions of ordinary people who stood on cool floors, tightened worn laces, listened to thin walls, and stepped toward a day that would ask for almost everything they had, and ask it without apology. The room behind you grows dimmer as you leave it, but the memory of it stays close. The smoke in the cloth, the warped window, the basin water, all of it following you softly toward the next ritual waiting in the house. The next ritual is breakfast, though ritual makes it sound gentler than it is. Breakfast in 1880 America is not a slow pleasure with idle conversation floating over bright plates. It is a calculated beginning, a fuel stop for human machinery that still runs on muscle, weather, and stubbornness. You enter the kitchen, or the shared room where cooking happens, and the heat greets you before the food does. It is not broad warmth that fills the whole house evenly. It is local warmth, the kind gathered around a stove or hearth, while the edges of the room remain cool enough to remind you who is really in charge. A pot murmurs softly. A pan gives off the smell of something frying in fat. Someone has already been awake long enough to make this happen, which is another way of saying someone else's day began before yours. That is true of almost everything here. Comfort always has a worker standing somewhere behind it. Bread did not simply appear. Coffee did not decide to boil itself. Eggs, if there are eggs, began as the problem of an animal that needed tending in the dark. You sit or you stand near the table waiting. The table itself is worn smooth at the edges, polished not by design but by generations of hands, sleeves, elbows, and damp cloths. It has the kind of authority sturdy furniture acquires when it has survived children, repairs, and many bad winters. The chair under you creaks in one familiar place. Nothing in this room is silent, but the sounds are domestic, known, almost conversational. A spoon against a bowl, a kettle lid shifting, someone clearing a throat, a child being told, quietly and only once, not to reach yet. The food arrives without flourish. There is no one presenting breakfast as a little work of art. It is a working meal, designed to carry a body forward. Cornmeal, mush, perhaps, steaming softly. Bread sliced thick. Salt pork if the household can manage it. Eggs if the season and circumstance allow. Maybe potatoes warmed from earlier cooking. Coffee, often thinner and harsher than modern drinkers would expect, but strong enough in spirit, if not always in actual bean concentration. Milk only if it has stayed sweet, and if an animal nearby is still giving it. Otherwise, milk becomes butter, or cheese, or nothing at all. You take your first bite and feel something almost immediate in the chest. Not delight exactly, but steadiness. That is what this meal is for. It is not trying to charm you. It is trying to keep you from failing at noon. Historians who study food and labor often point out that people doing hard physical work in this period usually eat much more heavily in the morning than many people do now. Not because they are indulging themselves, but because the day has already announced its appetite and they are negotiating with it in advance. The taste is plain. The texture is not. Texture matters in ways that become surprisingly important when meals must satisfy more than entertain. A spoonful of mush carries heat and weight. Bread asks your jaw to work a little. Fat leaves a quiet richness behind that the body seems to understand on its own terms. Soft food is kinder to tired teeth. Dense food lingers longer in the stomach. Nothing here is accidental, even when no one in the house would describe it as strategy. They would probably just say, "This is what keeps you going." And it does. That is the marvelous, unsentimental wisdom of ordinary households. They may not speak in nutritional theories, but they know what lasts. They know the difference between food that comforts briefly and food that stays with you through lifting, bending, chopping, washing, hauling, standing. They know that if a morning begins badly, the body remembers by afternoon. Conversation at breakfast exists, but lightly. Mornings are not built for long emotional conferences. There may be a remark about the weather, because weather deserves constant review. There may be a note about what must be done today, who needs to go where, what is running low, what tool needs mending, Which animal looked wrong yesterday? The subjects are practical because practical subjects are what hold the day together. A joke might appear dry and quick, then disappear again. People in the past were not humorless, no matter how stern some of their photographs try to suggest. They just did not always have the luxury of being leisurely about it. A child dunks bread into coffee or broth to soften it. An older adult does the same for reasons less optional. Dental care, if it exists at all, is limited, costly, and often unpleasant enough to make people avoid it until avoidance is no longer possible. Small household records and personal accounts mention this kind of soaking matter-of-factly, not as a charming tradition, but as a useful solution. That practical tenderness is everywhere in this era if you know where to look. People do not always speak warmly. They often arrange warmth instead. You become aware, too, of how little is wasted. Crumbs are noticed. Fat is saved. Bones are not discarded casually because broth exists, and broth can become the difference between a thin evening and a decent one. Bread that hardens will be reborn in some other form tomorrow. Stale food is not the end of a food story. It is merely a plot twist. There is something almost philosophical in the way households refuse to let ingredients retire when they still have one more performance left in them. As you finish your portion, you feel the meal settling into you. Not heavily, not lazily, steadily. Breakfast here does not ask you to savor yourself. It asks you to continue. That may sound austere, but there is a kind of reassurance in it. 2. One less decision to make. One clear purpose already fulfilled. You are awake. You are dressed. You are fed. In this world, that counts as a very successful morning. The table clears quickly. Cups are moved. Bowls gathered. Someone wipes the surface in practiced arcs. Water is used carefully. Soap more carefully still. Every motion suggests a mind already aware of the next motion. There is very little single task living in 1880. Washing breakfast things is also preparing the room for whatever comes next. Carrying water is also calculating what remains for later. Nothing is isolated. Everything touches something else. When you step back and really look at the house now, properly look at it, you begin to understand that it is not just a shelter. It is a working system. The walls hold heat when they can, release it when they must, and complain audibly whenever the weather changes. Floorboards sigh. Doors stick in their frames. Windows rattle or leak. The whole structure behaves less like a sealed product and more like a living negotiation between human intention and stubborn material. The room nearest the stove has the highest status because heat travels imperfectly, and people know this without needing to discuss it every 10 minutes. A chair is placed close to warmth because warmth is precious. A table stands by a window because daylight is a form of currency. Shelves hold only what is needed, and often not enough of that. Space is organized not for beauty first, though beauty sometimes sneaks in anyway, but for use. This hook here because a coat dries faster. That basket there because the light is good enough for sewing. The broom near the door because mud must be dealt with before it becomes a household opinion. If you were standing here with me, you would notice how much of the room's logic is invisible until you imagine the absence of convenience. Without indoor plumbing, water enters the house by effort. Without central heating, warmth stays near its source and must be corded accordingly. Without electric light, evening shrinks the room down to the places a lamp can reach. Layout is memory. Placement is efficiency. Forget where you put something, and you do not just lose time. You lose daylight, temper, energy. Perhaps all three. The ceiling bears soot in the places smoke has preferred over the years. Chimneys draw imperfectly. Stoves help, but do not solve everything. The smell of fuel joins the smell of food and cloth until it becomes part of the house's own identity. A stranger notices it sharply. People who live here notice it mostly when it changes. When smoke thickens the wrong way. When damp wood burns poorly. When something is not right. There are marks on the table that are not yours. Grooves worn into the arm of a chair. A place on the floor where generations of heels have turned. Homes in this period often carry previous lives openly. Families inherit them, rent them, aita them, patch them, divide them with curtains, or repurpose them with additions. The house is not a finished statement. It is an ongoing revision. Building records and diaries show lean-to rooms added when a relative moved in. Cloth hung to create privacy where no wall could be afforded. Windows patched because replacing them properly would wait for another year. Houses evolve the way families do, through necessity and approximation. You move through the space and feel the way the home guides your path. This is not just where you live. It teaches you how to live. Walk here in the dark, and your hand will find the chair back before your shin finds the chair leg, because you have learned the room through repetition. Place shoes there, not here, because night makes fools of clutter. Keep sewing by the good light. Keep stove tools by the stove. Keep things where the body will need them before the mind has fully woken. Some historians argue that living in such close practical relationship with a house produces a different attentiveness, a sharper spatial intelligence. Others might say people simply adapted because they had no alternative. That sounds like the same truth wearing two different coats. Then there is clothing, which you already feel on you more than you see. Clothes in 1880 are less an aesthetic announcement than a daily alliance. The shirt or blouse against your skin, the skirt or trousers around your legs, the heavier outer layer settling over the shoulders. All of it contributes to how you move through the room. Fabrics are not weightless. They resist a little. They pull. They hold shape. They ask your body to cooperate with them. Undergarments are plain and serviceable. Outer garments do the harder public work. Wool scratches at first, and then becomes tolerable in the way persistent annoyances sometimes become family. Cotton is welcome when available. Linen lasts. Buttons matter. Hooks matter. Missing closures become household problems surprisingly fast. A garment half functioning is not romantic. It is irritating. One can imagine the entire morning soured by an uncooperative fastening, which is perhaps why mending occupies so much attention in domestic life. Needle and thread are not hobbies. They are infrastructure. You look down at a sleeve and see careful stitches crossing a weakened place. The patch is not decorative, yet there is something deeply satisfying about competence made visible. Manuals from the era treat sewing and mending as essential knowledge, almost as fundamental as cooking, arithmetic, or reading a simple instruction. Many children, especially girls, but not only girls, learn repair early because cloth is expensive, replacement slow, and weather impatient. Clothing that lasts is an achievement. You become aware of how garments shape posture. Heavy skirts require management. Trousers wear differently at the knee. Corsetry, belts, suspenders, collars, shawls, hats. All of these pieces guide how the body occupies space. Scholars still debate how restrictive some of these garments were in daily life, and the answer seems to depend greatly on class, task, and individual circumstance. Popular imagination often chooses the most dramatic version because it is more theatrical. Daily life usually offers something subtler, a long negotiation between practicality, expectation, and bodily tolerance. And color, when present, is often modest. Browns, grays, deep blues, blacks, tones that hide dirt, weather, and repeated wear. Bright colors exist, but they cost more in money, maintenance, or both. Households do not always choose drabness because they lack imagination. Sometimes they choose it because mud has opinions, dust has opinions, smoke has opinions. Daily life is full of opinionated substances. The shoes, especially, complete the sensation of being dressed for endurance rather than display. They are stiff enough to remind you of their presence with every bend of the foot. They are repaired because replacing them is expensive. Leather stretches unevenly according to the owner's gait, so shoes become personal in a way mass-produced abundance has partly erased from modern life. You know where the left one rubs. You know which lace is nearing treason. You know how far you can walk before the pressure at the heel begins making editorial comments. By the time you are fully assembled, you stop noticing most of it unless something goes wrong. That is always the final stage of clothing in a hard-working society. At first you feel every seam. Then, if the garment is doing its job well enough, you feel only the day itself. Clothes become the quiet membrane between body and world, absorbing sweat, smoke, dust, rain, and motion. By evening, they will smell like the hours you have lived. Tomorrow, unless something tears beyond hope, they will do it all again. There is intimacy in that repetition. People in 1880 often know where a garment came from, who repaired it last, whose body wore it before theirs, which season faded it, which winter nearly ruined it. A coat is not just a coat. It is a biography in wool. A shawl is memory you can fold. A pair of boots is a negotiation between the road and the foot that has somehow managed not to end in open hostility. As the house settles into the next stage of mourning, and you stand there in your patched, weighted, useful clothes, warmed just enough by breakfast and by the stove's local kindness, you begin to understand something larger about this world. Nothing is extra. Nothing is neutral. The meal, the room, the fabric, the chair near the stove, the towel, the shoes, every one of them has been shaped by the same quiet logic. Survive first. Preserve second. Repair always. And if beauty arrives after that, let it come quietly, without making a fuss. You glance toward the doorway again. Somewhere just beyond it, children are already moving with purpose. The house has fed you and dressed you, and now, with almost no pause at all, it is ready to show you how even the youngest people inside it are being trained by repetition into usefulness, competence, and belonging. The day keeps widening, and the next set of footsteps is already on its way. Children are already in motion by the time you fully notice them. They pass through the house with the speed of small people who know exactly where they are allowed to be slow and where they are absolutely not. One of them carries a bucket with both hands, leaning back slightly to balance the weight. Another reaches for a broom that has clearly been shortened for smaller arms. A third stands on a box near the table, wiping something with determined seriousness, the kind that would be adorable if it were not also entirely necessary. That is one of the first truths you learn about childhood in 1880 America. It does not live in a separate bright room called childhood. It lives in the same rooms as everything else. It shares the air with labor, duty, noise, weather, and hunger. Play exists, yes, and laughter certainly exists, because children have always been terribly committed to smuggling joy into every system that tries to over-organize them. But play and work are not cleanly divided. A child may sweep while humming. A child may race a sibling to finish carrying wood. A child may turn a chore into a contest without ever being told it was a game. You watch one little figure pause by the stove, glance up for approval, then continue without receiving any. That tells you almost everything. Praise here is brief because time is brief. Instruction is constant because survival is constant. Competence matters more than ceremony. No one is trying to crush delight out of these children. The house simply cannot afford idleness for long enough to build a philosophy around it. Historians of family life often point out that children in this period contribute meaningfully to the household very early. On farms, they gather eggs, carry water, sort vegetables, feed animals, fetch tools, and learn where every useful object belongs. In towns and cities, they run errands, mind younger siblings, wind thread, help with laundry, polish shoes, carry meals, and learn to move through adult spaces without interrupting them. This is not usually presented to them as a cruel burden. It is presented as belonging. You live here, therefore you help here. It is simple, and because it is simple, it can feel heavier than grand speeches ever do. You notice how they listen, not with the dreamy half-attention modern adults often imagine in children, but with quick, practical ears. A child here learns by watching before anyone decides to call it education. Watch how mother folds cloth. Watch how father secures a latch. Watch how an older sister tests a jar lid. Watch how an older brother lifts with the knees instead of the back. I have always found it strange that people speak as if earlier generations of children were less taught, when, in many ways, they were being taught constantly. The lesson was simply embedded in the motion of the day rather than outlined on a cheerful chart. A small hand reaches for the wrong cup. A quiet correction follows. Another child tracks me mud too far into the room and is sent back with a rag. No one writes this down in a school book. Yet these are lessons all the same. How to maintain order. How not to waste effort. How to repair a mistake before it grows teeth. By 7 or 8, many children can already do things that would make later adults blink in surprise. Period observers often mention this with a mixture of admiration and assumption. They tie knots, tend fires carefully, prepare simple food, carry messages, mind babies, and remember instructions over long stretches of the day. Some scholars see this as resilience. Others see it as evidence that families had few alternatives. Both readings are probably true. History is annoyingly fond of allowing two uncomfortable truths to sit down side by side. Still, you also see the other side. A child pauses at the window to watch a bird hop across the yard. Another uses the broom handle as a pretend horse for exactly 3 seconds before remembering it has actual sweeping responsibilities. A little joke passes under the table. A grin flashes and disappears. Joy is not absent. It is threaded through the labor, quick and durable, like bright thread in a plain hem. When the time comes for school, if school is where this child is going today, the transition is practical rather than dramatic. Lessons must fit around weather, work, distance, and family need. Attendance in 1880 Israel, valued and increasingly encouraged by law in many places. But the reality is uneven. If harvest is underway, if a younger sibling is ill, if wages are needed, if boots are not in good enough shape for the walk, school may wait. Education is respected, but so is necessity, and necessity usually has better attendance. You step into the schoolroom with the same awareness you carried into the kitchen. Everything has purpose, and almost nothing has softness to spare. The room is smaller than later imaginations tend to make it. The windows are high enough to discourage daydreaming, which suggests that teachers understood children perfectly well and simply took a firmer approach to architecture. Light falls in long, pale bands across rough desks carved with initials and old impatience. Dust hangs in the air where chalk has recently lived. Desks sit in rows, though not perfectly, Nothing in this world is quite perfectly aligned for long. The floorboards have been worn by many shoes. The blackboard bears the white ghosts of earlier lessons. Books are few. Slates are precious. Chalk is used down close to the fingers. Everything in the room feels slightly rationed, including comfort, including patience. The teacher stands at the front with that particular posture adults acquire when they are solely responsible for maintaining order among many young bodies in one room. There is no microphone, no projector, no pile of colorful aids promising delight. There is voice, repetition, expectation, and the small cold power of embarrassment. Lessons are read aloud, copied, recited, memorized. Understanding matters, certainly, but not always first. First comes retention. First comes discipline. First comes proving that the words can stay where they were put. The small child sounds out letters. An older student works through arithmetic. Another recites a passage and stumbles over a word. A correction comes quickly. There is no cruelty in the air exactly, but there is little cushioning either. The atmosphere is quiet without being gentle. Many former students later remembered the sting of forgetting in public more vividly than they remembered the content of the lesson itself. A room full of listeners can turn one missed syllable into an event. This is a one-room school in many places, which means many ages share the same air, the same teacher, the same limited resources, and often the same bench of impatience. Education here is communal and uneven. Progress does not move in one neat line. It lurches according to who attended last week, who had to miss for work, who arrived fed, who arrived cold, who has a book at home, who has only memory to lean on. You glance around and notice who is absent from the neat story later generations sometimes tell. Black children in many parts of the country are schooled separately and unequally if they are schooled at all. Indigenous children face systems designed less to educate them than to erase them. Girls attend, often seriously and capably, yet may be pulled away earlier as domestic expectations narrow around them. Poverty edits education long before teachers do. The room contains hope, yes, but it also contains limits. And those limits sit in the corners even when no one names them aloud. Still, knowledge matters here. A child who can read a notice, keep simple accounts, write a letter, follow instructions, and calculate a figure is carrying tools that can change the shape of a life, or at least widen it a little. That widening may be modest. It may not produce escape, but it matters. Some parents push for more schooling. Others believe practical skills should come first. The debate runs through the century like a seam that will not stop catching on everything. A reader at the front recites something line by line. Others repeat. The room fills with the rhythm of shared speech. There is a kind of music in that, though I doubt the children would always have appreciated my saying so. To them, it is probably just the sound of being made to sit still while daylight waits outside. Yet for all its austerity, the schoolroom is also one of the few places where time is set aside for the idea that a mind deserves shaping as much as a field or a fence does. When lessons end, they do not dissolve into leisure. They dissolve into the next demand. Slates are wiped, books stacked, coats gathered. Feet hurry out. Some children run because children have always been gloriously loyal to running when adults stop requiring stillness. Others walk straight home because another kind of work is already waiting. You follow one such child back toward the house or the yard or the workshop nearby. There is no pause in which anyone says, "Now you may enjoy being a child before evening chores." The phrase would make no sense inside this world. Childhood is not a waiting room. It is an active role, already underway. Capability matters more than birthdays. If you can carry, you carry. If you can watch, you watch. If you can learn, you are expected to learn quickly. Back at home, tasks reassemble around the returning bodies. Shoes come off the threshold more carefully. A pot is stirred. A younger sibling is lifted. Thread is wound. Scraps are sorted. Someone is sent outside again because the first trip did not bring back enough. The house absorbs all of it without complaint because houses in this era have no choice but to become expert at absorbing. One little girl sits near the better light with cloth in her lap, learning how to stitch a seam that does not pucker. Beside her, a boy tries to whittle something useful and mostly produces wood shavings and determination. Another child rocks a cradle with one foot while copying letters in a slate notebook. None of this appears remarkable to the adults around them. That may be the most remarkable thing of all. You hear a laugh from the corner. A true laugh, quick and warm. Someone has done something foolish with a spoon or made a face behind a serious adult back. The moment flashes and passes, but it changes the room. That, too, is childhood here. Not endless freedom, not decorative innocence, but the astonishing ability to make light from narrow circumstances. As the afternoon deepens, you understand that what these children are learning is not just how to perform tasks. They are learning the architecture of belonging. They are learning how a household works, how adults speak, how tools are treated, how food is valued, how silence functions, how correction feels, how work begins before one feels ready, and how tiredness does not exempt a person from usefulness. These are hard lessons, but they are not abstract. They arrive attached to actual things, to pails and spoons and buttons and broom handles and pages and wood smoke and the angle of winter light. By evening, they will be tired in the same plain way adults are tired. Sleep will come because the body has been used. Complaints will be brief because everyone is carrying some version of the same day. In that shared fatigue, there is something almost tender. Nobody needs to explain why a child is quiet after supper. The whole house understands. And as you watch these small, serious figures moving through rooms built by necessity, rooms that ask a great deal and rarely apologize for it, you begin to see how ordinary competence is made. Not in speeches, not in grand inspiring moments, in repetition, in being trusted too early, corrected too often, laughed with when possible, and folded into the work of living before anyone thinks to call it preparation. Their future is not waiting somewhere ahead. It is already in the room with them, already in their hands, already taking shape with every bucket lifted, every letter traced, every younger child soothed, every task repeated until it becomes part of the body. Soon enough, the child in the doorway is replaced by an adult figure moving toward the next labor of the day, and the house itself seems to lean toward that larger rhythm. Childhood has shown you how responsibility begins. The next thing this world wants you to see is what responsibility becomes when the body is full grown and the whole weight of work settles in for the long middle of the day. Work takes over without fanfare. There is no trumpet announcing that now the serious business of the nation begins. The serious business has been underway since before dawn. It merely changes hands, locations, and tools. One person leaves the house with boots already damp at the edges. Another bends over a washboard. Another steps onto a factory floor. Another heads to a shop, a field, a yard, a track, a stable, a kitchen, a counter. America in 1880 is working almost everywhere you look, and it is working in ways that leave marks. You feel it first in the body, a certain settling of the shoulders, a certain readiness in the hands, tools lifted and adjusted until they fit the grip, muscles remembering what the mind does not need to rehearse. Whether you stand in a field under widening light or in a workshop where the air already tastes faintly of oil, work begins as repetition. Lift, carry, turn, stitch, measure, feed, sweep, stack, hammer, steer, walk, return, repeat. The motions are so constant that they almost become a second language. By this point in the century, millions of Americans live by wage labor, especially in cities and growing industrial towns. Shifts are long. 10 hours is not extraordinary. 12 is not unheard of. Breaks are brief enough that they do not so much interrupt the day as blink inside it. In the countryside, the clock looks different, but the demand does not soften. There, the work follows daylight, weather, season, animal, need, ace while condition. One system is ruled by whistle and machinery, the other by sky and ground. Both are relentless in their own accent. If you stand in the city, the noise reaches you first. Hooves on stone, wheels grinding, steam venting in short, impatient bursts, iron knocking against iron, a belt turning, a press thumping, voices rising only enough to clear the rest of the sound. Streets narrow under the pressure of bodies and carts and deliveries. Buildings lean close. Smoke hangs in the air and settles into cuffs and collars as if it intends to come home with you. It often does. If you stand in the country, the space opens, but the labor does not become gentler just because there is more horizon to look at. Distance itself becomes a task. Walking to the barn is a task. Walking to the fence is a task. Walking to fetch the thing that was forgotten near the shed is a task. And it is the sort of task that later people would solve by pressing a button and muttering at convenience. Here you solve it with your feet and a resigned little breath. The contrast between city and countryside runs through the nation like a quiet argument. Urban populations are growing quickly. Factories multiply. Railroads stitch markets together and bring unfamiliar goods and strangers to familiar streets. Yet the countryside continues to feed and fuel those same cities, sending in grain, meat, timber, produce, and laboring bodies while receiving prices, news, manufactured goods, and new anxieties in return. The two worlds are different, but they are not separate. They need each other while often mistrusting each other. It is a very human arrangement. Time feels different in each place. In the factory, minutes are clipped and counted more sharply. Bells and whistles carry authority. A late arrival is visible. A paused hand is noticeable. Motion becomes fragmented into narrower actions, repeated until skill and fatigue blur together. In the field, time stretches and contracts with weather. You may work until the light says stop, until clouds change the plan, until an animal needs tending, until rain makes the road useless. One system values speed and specialization. The other values versatility and endurance. Neither system is merciful enough to qualify as a lifestyle retreat. As you move through this working day, sound becomes a kind of map. In town, you can tell the hour by what rises and what fades. Early morning has wheels and voices. Midday has a fuller hum, heavier, with industry, bargaining, movement. Evening thins it all into domestic sounds and slower footsteps. In the country, sound is cleaner edged. Wind in grass. A gate hitting its post. Chickens protesting something important to chickens. Distant hammering. An axe finding wood. A dog giving one bark because one bark is apparently sufficient for the job description. People in this period become skilled listeners because daily life demands it. You hear whether rain is coming by the roof before you see it in the yard. You know which horse is passing by its gate. You know whether a machine is behaving by the note of it. You know whether a cough in the next room is ordinary or the sort that needs watching. Later generations sometimes imagine the 19th century as quieter, and in one sense, perhaps, it was, because there was less electric hum and less motorized insistence. But quiet is not the same as silence. This world is full of sound. It is simply sound made by bodies, weather, wood, metal, and animals rather than circuits. Travel belongs to the day as work belongs to the body. You cannot treat distance casually. If you are walking, the journey is part of the labor. If you are riding, the horse has needs that outrank your impatience. If you are taking a wagon, mud, roots, weather, and wheel condition all reserve the right to insult your plans. Railroads can collapse huge distances between major points. Yes, But getting to the station is still the problem of roads and feet and time. Movement is not a minor convenience layered gently over life. It determines what life can be. You do not decide lightly to go somewhere and then figure out how. You decide based on how travel will shape the whole day. A short errand may still cost hours. A longer journey requires preparation, food, weather awareness, and this sort of practical optimism that refuses to become melodrama just because the road is worse than expected. Diaries and letters often measure travel not by abstract mileage first, but by landmarks and bodily experience. The bend after the mill, the church past the muddy stretch, the long uphill near the trees. Distance is remembered through friction. Money runs quietly underneath all of this like a narrow, worried stream. Coins matter. Paper matters too. But many daily transactions still feel most real when they ring in the palm. Wages may come weekly. They may come late. They may be small enough that each coin has to explain itself very carefully before being spent. Purchases are rarely casual. A candle, a bit of thread, nails, flour, salt, lamp oil. All of these are weighed not only by price, but by timing. Buy now or wait. Spend on repair or replacement. Pay cash or ask for credit from someone who already knows your face and therefore your weaknesses. Markets and shops reveal a whole philosophy of necessity. Prices are discussed aloud. Negotiation is expected often enough that silence after a quoted amount can be a form of communication. Shopkeepers know who pays on time, who asks often, who has had a bad season, who might need leniency, and who should perhaps not be trusted with more leniency than last time. Credit exists, but it is personal, which makes it both human and dangerous. Debt is not an abstract national concern in the air. It is the storekeeper writing your name into a book and your own stomach tightening slightly when you think about next week. Everywhere you look, gender shapes labor. Men dominate certain kinds of paid work, public authority, transport, and heavy trade. Women carry enormous amounts of labor that may never appear in wages at all. Cooking, cleaning, sewing, nursing, washing, bookkeeping within the household, preserving food, tending children, tending the sick, stretching every resource until it almost sings. The house does not support work. The house is work. There is a persistent illusion in later memory that domestic labor was separate from the economy. It was the economy, only arranged in rooms small enough to disappear from ledgers. You can feel the hierarchy of the society just by watching who is expected to endure what without complaint. Race shapes opportunity and treatment brutally and continuously. Black Americans live with unequal access, unequal safety, unequal pay, unequal assumptions laid over ordinary tasks like additional shadow. Indigenous people are pushed out, watched, managed, erased in policy and in daily habit. Chinese laborers and new immigrants face suspicion, hostility, and constrained opportunity, even while their work is used, relied on, and profited from. None of this floats above everyday life as theory. It enters the room through wages, through hiring, through where one may live, stand, sit, speak, or seek help. Even health is folded into labor rather than protected from it. You feel a cough and keep going. You feel a strain in the back and shift your lifting method rather than stop. Doctors exist, but not always nearby, not always affordable, not always reliably helpful. Care often remains in the house, in broths, rest when possible, cloths changed, remedies suggested by neighbors, patent medicines promising too much, and the stern little prayer that this ailment remain one of the ordinary ones. People work sick more often than later generations would consider wise, because the alternatives are not gentle either. By midday, fatigue arrives like a known acquaintance, not dramatic, not theatrical, to just present. The shoulders delay a fraction before the next lift. The mouth dries faster. Hunger comes back. Feet begin issuing commentary. Yet the day continues. Some observers of the period later praise the endurance of workers as moral strength, while others saw simply habituation. Bodies taught by scarcity to continue because scarcity did not offer applause for stopping. You can understand both views while wanting to hug neither of them. And still, there are brief, small human lights inside the work. A shared joke under the noise. Someone passing a cup without being asked. A glance that says, "This is miserable and therefore we must be funny for one moment or we will turn into tools ourselves." Camaraderie exists, but it should not be mistaken for comfort. Pressure shared is still pressure. It just becomes less lonely. As afternoon lengthens, you feel the deeper divide inside the nation again. The city imagines the future arriving on iron rails. The countryside imagines security rooted in land and routine. Some people look toward urban growth with hope. Others look at it and see wages too thin, rooms too crowded, air too foul, strangers too many. Some rural families dream of city opportunity. Some city laborers dream of open ground. Many are wrong about the relief waiting in the other place, which is one of history's favorite little cruelties. Children move through this world learning quickly which future is imagined for them. A child in town might already be translating between languages, running deliveries, learning the pace of hired work. A child in the country might already know every fence line and feed bucket and weather sign. Capability defines age more than sentiment does. And the schoolroom, when available, must compete with all of it, offering literacy and arithmetic into lives already crowded with tasks. You step out at some point, perhaps from workshop to street, perhaps from yard to road, and the sound hits differently now. It has thickened with a day. Carts rattle. A bell marks an hour that your body already knew had passed. A dog barks at a reason invisible to you but fully persuasive to the dog. Voices cross paths. Metal strikes metal somewhere with the conviction of a person who would rather not be interrupted while striking metal. There was very little dead air in 1880 America. The nation seems to breathe through movement. Travel continues inside the workday. Goods need carrying. Messages need delivering. People need getting somewhere before light fades too far. A horse shifting in harness is not scenery. It is infrastructure. A boot worn thin at the toe is not an aesthetic failing. It is a problem of mileage, money, and weather. The road is never merely there. It is dry or muddy, hard-packed or deeply rutted, safe enough or not. You read it the way one reads temperament. By late afternoon, the body becomes the clock more than ever. Hunger returns with more confidence. Hands know exactly how much they have done. Clothing now tells the story too. Dust at the hem, sweat at the collar, smoke in the sleeves, a bent hat brim, mud drying at the ankle. One of the quietest truths of this era is that by evening, your garments testify against the day more honestly than your mouth ever will to stay. And yet, for all the wear, the work has a structure that can feel almost calming once you stop expecting kindness from it. There is relief in repetition for a tired mind. Do this, then this, then this. Return the tool. Count the coins. Lift the sack. Close the gate. Sweep the corner. The day narrows into tasks, and by narrowing becomes bearable. Some historians argue that this constant engagement with physical reality anchored people more firmly in the present. Others counter that fatigue simply left less room for abstraction. Again, the truth may be both. Human beings are often most philosophical when they are too tired to make a grand fuss about it. At last, the heaviest part of the work begins to loosen. Not with celebration. That would be too modern, too managerial, too close to the idea that labor owes you morale. Instead, it loosens through small endings. One less load. One final pass. A tool set down and not lifted again. A machine quieting. A field looked over one last time in slanting light. The body recognizes the change before the mind does. Breath alters. Muscles release by a degree. You are not done with the day, but the sharpest edge has passed. You leave carrying fatigue like another layer of clothing. In town, the street feels different now, less urgent but still alive. In the country, the light has gone honey-colored and the tasks turned domestic again. The divide between city and field remains, but both are moving toward evening by their own routes. Behind you stays the noise, the dust, the labor, the long argument between old ways and new demands. Before you waits the slower part of the day, when homes take over once more, when money must be counted, food considered, doors eventually closed, and the body, at long last, can begin thinking not about output, but about return. The nation may be expanding, industrializing, arguing with itself, inventing new speeds and new tensions. But most lives are still held together by this simple arc. Wake, work, return. The grandeur comes later, when someone writes about it. Living it is plainer, rougher, and in some ways more interesting. You have seen how the day moves outside the house. Soon the house will gather all that noise and motion back into itself, and evening will show you what this world does with the small amount of softness it can spare. You carry the afternoon with you as you move toward the places where money becomes visible. Not grand banks with polished counters and the sort of confidence that belongs mostly to other people, but ordinary places. A market stall, a dry goods counter, a small shop where the floorboards have learned the weight of boots, hesitation, and arithmetic. In 1880 America, money is rarely abstract for long. It becomes flour, lamp oil, thread, nails, salt pork, sugar if fortune is feeling unusually cooperative, and sometimes the more painful category of things postponed until next week. You reach for coins with a kind of attention that feels almost tender. They are small, cold, and strangely personal. Silver feels different from copper. Weight matters. Sound matters. A coin in the hand is certainty, at least for a minute, and that minute has value, all its own. Paper money exists, of course, and travels more easily over larger distances. But for many daily exchanges, what feels most real is what rings against the counter. You count once, then again, because a mistake at this scale is not romantic. It is supper altered, a repair deferred, a candle missing when the room needs light most. The shopkeeper watches without seeming to watch. That is part of the ritual. He knows you. Or if he does not know you yet, he knows your type, your clothes, your pace, the way you hold the coins before surrendering them. Trust in this world is built in layers no thicker than paper and no stronger than repetition. Someone who pays when promised is remembered. Someone who lingers too often in the territory of maybe next week is also remembered. Credit exists, but it is a social relationship disguised as bookkeeping. A name in a ledger can feel almost like a hand on the shoulder. You look around and see how carefully people move through the shop. No one is casually browsing for amusement. People touch with purpose. They compare, estimate, compromise. A woman studies the quality of cloth by pinching it between thumb and finger, reading durability through friction. A man tests the balance of a tool he may not be able to afford today, but already understands in his wrist. A child stares too long at something sweet and is redirected with a sort of look that contains both apology and instruction. Later generations would call this budgeting. Here it feels more like weather sense. You learn to feel limits before you strike them. Account books from the period are full of tiny purchases recorded with almost devotional precision. A bit of thread, a pound of meal, lampwick, buttons, soap, molasses. It is one of the strangest and most revealing details of the era. Whole lives can be reconstructed from these little entries, and what emerges is not extravagance, not even especially variety, but maintenance. People are constantly maintaining the edges of life, patching, replacing, stretching, choosing. Money does not promise comfort. It promises the ability to keep inconvenience from becoming disaster. Debt hovers at the edge of all this like a draft under the door. Some families use it lightly, almost elegantly, as a bridge across a thin season. Others carry it heavily, the way one carries a sack that cannot be put down because the floor is already too full. You cannot always tell which is which just by looking. Pride dresses well when it has to. Still, you notice it in pauses, in how long someone studies a price before speaking, in how quickly another says, "Put it on the account," with a tone carefully emptied of embarrassment. Children learn these calculations by breathing the same air. They understand where adults stop and where they keep walking. They know which purchases are ordinary and which mean things are going well enough to risk pleasure. A small sweet can become a weather report. A strip of ribbon can mean wages arrived. A repaired shoe instead of a new one tells another story. Money in 1880 does not merely buy goods. It reveals the shape of possibility. And then, just as quietly, the whole subject of money opens into the wider question of who is expected to handle what, to earn what, to decide what. Gender is not a separate lecture in this world. It is the floor plan. It lives in the arrangement of bodies around work, in the shape of time, in the assumptions that trail after every ordinary act, like hems gathering dust. You feel it in the house first. Certain spaces seem already assigned before anyone enters them. The stove, the wash kettle, the cradle, the mending basket, the ledger tucked in a drawer. These belong not legally, perhaps, but habitually to women. Outside the house, the workshop, the stable, the road, the office, the public counter belong more readily to men. The split is not perfect because life is never obliging enough to remain fully inside its own rules, but the expectations are clear enough that a person carries them in posture before carrying them in opinion. A man may earn wages in town and still know almost nothing about the exact daily engineering that keeps a household fed, clothed, warmed, and presentable. A woman may never appear on a payroll and still conduct more economic triage before noon than any banker with a whiskered portrait and an opinion about thrift. That is one of the great hidden structures of 1880 America. Authority and responsibility do not always sit in the same chair. Women run households that behave like small businesses with no holidays and very poor public relations. They track stores of food, soap, foil, cloth, medicine, and patience. They mend, cook, preserve, soothe, clean, account, plan, improvise, and carry the invisible labor of noticing. That last one may be the most exhausting. To notice that the last good candle is burning too fast. To notice which child has a cough that sounds wrong. To notice that the flour barrel is lower than it should be. That the hem has come loose. That the wash water will have to be heated before dawn if tomorrow is to proceed without mutiny. Honestly, if someone had invented a medal for noticing everything while being thanked for almost none of it, the century could have saved itself some explanatory work. Men inhabit a different set of burdens. Their labor is often public, paid, judged, and physically punishing in ways that leave no ambiguity on the body. To fail as a worker can mean to fail visibly. To be unable to provide is not just a financial problem. It is an identity crisis built into the social fabric. Boys absorb this early. Girls absorb their version just as early. Capability is praised, but capability within the correct category is praised most warmly. You see how clothing itself collaborates in this arrangement. A long skirt changes your relation to speed, stairs, dirt, and posture. A corseted shape, even when more practical than later caricatures suggest, still teaches the body a certain negotiation with space. Men, too, are instructed by suspenders, collars, boots, coats, hats, and the expectation of sturdy composure. Bodies are trained by fabric as much as by principle. There is disagreement among historians about how oppressive or adaptable these garments were in daily use. The answer, as usual, is irritatingly mixed. People adapt remarkably. That does not mean the limitations vanish. And yet, necessity keeps poking little holes in the wall of expectation. A woman takes charge during illness because who else is there? A man tends babies while his wife finishes work that cannot wait. A daughter learns accounts. A son learns to stir porridge without setting off a family crisis. Real life is full of these quiet trespasses. They are not always announced as rebellion. Often they are just survival in a practical hat. Toward late afternoon, you move into neighborhoods where the nation sounds different. The language in the street shifts around you. Consonants change shape. Signs in windows carry names that ask your mouth to travel farther than it expected. Immigration has been reshaping cities and towns in ways official speeches cannot fully control. Families arrive with trunks, children, recipes, saints, songs, habits of politeness, habits of distrust, and a willingness to sleep three to a room if that is what the city requires in exchange for wages. These neighborhoods feel crowded, yes, but also fiercely alive. Hallways carry cooking smells from several countries at once. A pot somewhere releases garlic into the air. Another cabbage, another broth, another yeast, rich warmth from baking that feels almost miraculous in a hard week. Laundry hangs where it can. Voices spill from windows. Children bounce between languages with the agility of acrobats and the confidence of people who do not yet know that adults will later call this complicated. Boarding houses and tenements hold more life than their walls ought to manage. Beds are shared in shifts. Someone leaves for work before dawn, and another slips into the same mattress when daylight is fully up. Privacy thins to almost nothing. And still, Community forms, not because conditions are ideal, but because they are not. A cousin helps you find work. A neighbor explains which landlord might wait 3 more days. A woman on the next floor shows another how to stretch unfamiliar ingredients into something that still tastes enough like home to keep a person from crying into the onions. There is tension too. Of course there is. Jobs feel scarcer when more hands arrive seeking them. Newspapers speak loudly, often nastily, about newcomers, about accents, about religion, about loyalty, about who belongs and who should be suspected. Yet the same city that complains about immigrants is constantly being built, scrubbed, cooked for, stitched, and hauled forward by them. That contradiction sits in the street without embarrassment. America has always been able to dislike the hands it is currently using. You notice how quickly children adapt compared with adults. They pick up phrases, shortcuts, schoolyard rules, gestures. They become interpreters before they become teenagers. They move between worlds with a speed that leaves parents both proud and slightly bereft. Home preserves one rhythm. Outside demands another. The child learns to bow to both and eventually translates more than language. They translate expectation, danger, manners, money, paperwork, and all the small humiliations of asking for something in words that do not yet fit right in the mouth. Churches, mutual aid societies, local halls, informal clubs, neighborhood grocers. All these places become scaffolding. They offer familiarity, warning, assistance, and sometimes a little dignity. A stranger becomes less strange after several Sundays, several borrowed chairs, several casseroles after illness, several arguments about politics carried on in 2 languages and 1 pot of coffee. Daily life in these communities is not neat hope. It is crowded hope, tired hope, hope that smells of coal, smoke, and stew and damp wool. Opportunity exists, yes, but so does exploitation, standing right beside it with a clipboard and a smile. A factory owner does not need to understand your story to use your labor. A landlord does not need to respect your customs to raise the rent. Still, people stay, arrive, gather, and persist. The pull of possibility is stronger than comfort has any right to be. As the light begins to tilt downward, the neighborhood changes sound again. Work releases bodies in waves. Doors open. Steps fill. Men return with the day in their shoulders. Women continue moving because the house is not impressed by outside labor and still expects supper. Children run messages and games into the narrowing strip of daylight. Someone tunes a fiddle upstairs. Someone argues below in a language you do not know, but a tone you recognize perfectly. Someone laughs so hard it interrupts the whole block for a second. It is wonderful. It is exhausting. It is life stacked close enough to hear itself breathe. You walk through it all, carrying what you have seen. Money counted to the penny. Gendered expectations stitched into work and gesture. New arrivals building old forms of belonging inside unfamiliar walls. The nation at this hour feels not grand, but layered. So many ordinary calculations underway at once. What to buy, what to save, who may speak, who must wait, which language to use, which rule to obey, which one to bend gently in private. And as evening draws nearer, one truth becomes clearer than the others. Everyday life in 1880 is not held together by abstractions. It is held together by endless small negotiations. Over the counter, across the table, between husbands and wives, between mothers and daughters, between neighbors who share little but a hallway, between old customs and new streets, between pride and hunger, between belonging and mere survival. You feel the day moving inward now. The market noise begins to thin. Coins disappear into pockets, aprons, drawers, and ledgers. Shop doors narrow toward closing. Windows reflect more than they reveal. Somewhere above the street, someone lights a lamp, and the yellow square of it hangs in the dusk, like a promise that inside, for a few hours at least, accounts can rest, expectations can soften by a degree, and the crowded nation can settle into rooms where supper, health, and the smaller graces of evening begin their slow, patient work. By the time you turn toward home again, the body has changed its conversation with the day. Earlier, it asked, what must be done? Now it asks, what can be set down? Evening in 1880, America does not arrive like a performance. It gathers. Light thins at the edges of buildings and fences. Shadows grow patient. The temperature shifts just enough for you to notice your sleeves again, or the looseness at the collar, or the damp patch of effort cooling across your back. Home draws near, not as luxury, but as a place where tasks become quieter and more intimate. You feel health in this era mostly by feeling its absence. That may be the first thing to understand. A well day is rarely named. It is simply used. A body that can work is a body that continues. A body that cannot becomes the center of an urgent rearrangement. In 1880, medicine exists, certainly, but not with the smooth confidence later centuries like to imagine when they look backward and squint. A doctor may be nearby, or may not. He may be skilled, or merely established. His tools may help, or may trouble more than they heal. Advice changes by region, by training, by habit, by personality, by the phase of the moon if one is feeling especially uncharitable. People still speak of drafts, dampness, bad air, fatigue, bile, weakness, constitution. Germ theory is entering the world, but it is not yet living in every kitchen and washstand as a clear set of instructions. So care remains practical, improvised, inherited. Someone keeps broth on the stove. Someone cools a cloth and lays it on a hot forehead. Someone opens the window a little, then closes it because perhaps the air is too sharp after all. Someone reaches for a bottle whose label promises relief from almost everything, which is usually the first sign that caution may be advisable. Patent medicines line shelves and counters with astonishing confidence. Tonics, cordials, syrups, bitters, restoratives. They speak in the voice of certainty because uncertainty sells poorly. Some help a little. Some do nothing. Some contain ingredients that would make a later pharmacist go pale around the mouth. Yet people buy them because what else is there to do when a cough lingers, a child burns with fever, or a back refuses to straighten after work? Illness is not only a medical problem, it is a scheduling crisis, an economic threat, a household emergency, and a moral test, all at once. Care within the home carries most of the weight. Women especially become nurses whether they asked for the title or not. They monitor, soothe, clean, feed, sit awake, and keep the rest of the household moving while also worrying quietly about whether this is merely a passing chill or the sort of thing that leaves a chair empty next month. Sickness in 1880 lives close to ordinary life. It is not hidden behind institutional doors very often. It breathes in the same room. It interrupts the same supper. It leaves its glass on the same table. Children know this early. They know what a fevered forehead feels like against the back of a careful hand. They know the smell of mustard plasters, boiled linens, broth left untouched, lamplight burned later than usual. Death, when it comes, is not abstracted away into a distant system. It comes nearer to home, nearer to the bed, nearer to the family. That closeness makes grief more familiar, but not lighter, just more woven into the visible fabric of life. And still, most evenings are not marked by catastrophe. Most evenings are marked by management, by the quiet, practical art of keeping tomorrow possible. You step into the pantry, keller, shed, or cool room where preserved food waits. The temperature changes there. Air stills. Smells sharpen. Salt, vinegar, smoke, dried herbs, wood, apples, if the season has been kind, onions, if they have kept, cured meat, if mice and mold have been successfully outwitted for another week. Preservation is one of the hidden epics of this century. Not dramatic enough for monuments, yet responsible for more daily relief than many speeches ever were. Shelves hold jars sealed with wax and hope. Sacks of grain crouch in corners. Crocks sit heavy and secretive. Meat hangs dark and serious. Beans wait with their little hard confidence. Nothing here is casual. Every jar represents earlier heat, earlier labor, earlier foresight. Summer and autumn reach into winter through glass, cloth, of salt and smoke. You run your fingers along a jar and test the lid not with suspicion exactly, but with informed respect. A bad seal is not an inconvenience. It is a small betrayal discovered too late. Households learn these lessons by touch, smell, and memory. No manual can replace the experience of opening one wrong jar and understanding. From then on, that waste is painful But sickness is dearer still. Some scholars talk about the nutritional limits of preserved diets, and they are right to do so. Repetition narrows variety. Freshness becomes seasonal privilege. Yet preservation is the difference between uncertainty and actual hunger. That matters more than elegance. There is a strange comfort in stored food. It is labor already done, waiting faithfully in the dark. It is the earlier self caring for the later self without ceremony. Past effort becomes present mercy. You look at the shelves and feel not abundance, perhaps, but readiness. And readiness has its own calm. Supper comes together from what can be warmed, softened, stretched, or improved by heat. Evening meals are rarely as heavy as breakfast, but they have a kind of gentleness breakfast cannot afford. Breakfast is strategy. Supper is return. Something simmers. Something browns. Bread is cut. A pot is stirred. Fat saved from earlier use flavors what would otherwise be too plain to satisfy. People eat not only to keep moving now, but to steady themselves after a day spent being used by the world. You sit and taste smoke, salt, grain, maybe a little sweetness, if luck has not entirely misplaced your address. The food is simple. It is often repetitive. Yet warmth itself changes it. Texture softens. Shoulders drop. A child who was all edges a quarter hour ago becomes quieter under the influence of heat and starch. Someone reaches for more, not greedily, just gratefully. Hunger in this era is not always dramatic, but it is regular enough that a warm bowl can feel close to spiritual. After the meal, the day loosens further. Not into idleness exactly. That word still sits badly in the room, but into a different category of movement. Dishes are washed or stacked for washing. Water is used with care. Ashes are banked. Tomorrow is arranged in small ways so morning will not arrive as an enemy. Bedclothes are turned down. Shoes placed where they can be found by dim light. A garment is mended before the tear becomes a true problem. A button is replaced. A note is made in the mind, if not on paper. And now, at last, little pockets of leisure begin to appear. Leisure in 1880 is often so modest that later ages would fail to recognize it on sight. It is a chair drawn close to the lamp. It is 10 extra minutes at the table. It is a story begun without needing a reason. It is a harmonica produced from a pocket. It is cards, perhaps soft at the edges from use. It is a newspaper read aloud, while others listen with one ear and keep their hands busy with shelling, folding, dawning, or just being tired. The wonderful thing about entertainment in this world is that it is made from presence more than equipment. There is no switch to flip and no machine offering a menu of distraction. If there is music, someone makes it. If there is a story, someone tells it. If there is a joke, it survives because others know enough of the same life for the joke to land. Participation is not optional because it is the whole system. A fiddle can shift the entire room. So can a remembered hymn. so can a ridiculous story about a mule, a cousin, a preacher, or a man who claimed he could fix a roof and instead made weather part of the interior design. Laughter rises differently here. Softer, perhaps. Less performative. It does not need to convince strangers on the next floor. It only needs to tell the room, for a moment, that work has loosened its hands. Reading aloud has a special place in the evening. Newspapers, serialized fiction, devotional writing, letters from relatives, all these can become communal through one steady voice. The room leans toward the sound. Those who cannot or do not read fluently still receive the words, shaped by someone else's mouth, inflected by local feeling. News enters the home this way and is immediately turned from information into conversation. A report from afar prompts commentary from someone who has never left the county. An accident in another city becomes an argument about progress. A political speech becomes a chance to say, well, that is easy for him to say. He is not the one patching the roof with a spoonful of savings. There is faith, too, even when no church bell is ringing. Religion in 1880 does not remain politely inside Sunday. It spills into language, manners, consolation, judgment, and hope. A blessing over food, a phrase about providence, a caution that sounds practical and theological at once. Faith offers structure where certainty is scarce. It also offers community, charity, and the occasional opportunity for people to be righteously annoying in the name of improvement. No century is without its enthusiasts. The room grows dimmer by degrees, and light becomes a thing you actively manage. Lamp oil costs. Wicks need trimming. A smoky lamp wastes precious fuel and makes the ceiling remember your incompetence. So the flame is watched, adjusted, shielded from drafts. Its circle defines the social world of the evening. Outside it, the room recedes. Corners disappear. The house becomes smaller and more intimate under limited light. Faces matter more than furniture. Voices drop naturally. The day folds inward. You notice privacy here mainly because it is scarce. Not tragic, perhaps, but certainly thin. Homes hold multiple lives at once, and walls are often bad at pretending otherwise. Curtains divide spaces. Doors exist, but not always locks. Children drift in and out. Boarders, relatives, in-laws, infants, all conspire against the idea of being wonderfully alone with your thoughts. Yet there are moments. A chair near a window after others have settled. A few quiet minutes while someone else tends the lamp. The private act of writing in a small book no one is supposed to find. Privacy in 1880 is often measured in minutes, not rooms. There is comfort in the closeness, too. Illness is witnessed. Grief is not left entirely alone. Tar day is legible to others without a speech being required. Being seen all the time is wearying. Yes, but it also means disappearance is harder. Support can arrive in the form of broth, A borrowed shawl, a neighbor checking in, a cousin bringing onions, a friend staying to help after the crowd has thinned. Community is not always tender, but it is present. Outside, weather still matters. It always matters. You hear it through the house before you see it tomorrow. Wind noses at the walls. Rain taps and slides. Cold settles into the floorboards. Heat lingers in trapped corners. A home in 1880 does not seal you off from the world. It negotiates with it. Doors latch. Curtains pull. Embers are banked so morning can begin with some mercy left in the stove. Night's safety is a matter of routines. The lock checked. The lamp lowered. The path to the bed kept clear. Shoes within reach. A tool nearby not because you expect catastrophe, but because preparedness is how people here keep fear from becoming a full-time resident. As the hour deepens, the whole house slows. Voices thin. Cards are set aside. The last page of the paper remains unread until tomorrow. Someone coughs behind a door. Someone laughs once more softly, as if unwilling to wake the children or perhaps unwilling to wake themselves fully before sleep. A mother smooths a blanket over a child. A father rubs the back of his neck and stares into the low flame as if the day might still be in there somewhere, waiting to be interpreted. The body softens into fatigue in a way modern life often interrupts. Work, food, dim light, and repetition have all been moving toward this point. Sleep in 1880 is not optimized. No one measures it, tracks it, scores it, discusses whether it feels aligned with a wellness philosophy. They are tired. They lie down. That is the system, and it is surprisingly effective when the day has used every available muscle. Mattresses are often uneven, stuffed with straw, corn husks, feathers if fortune and geography have been kind, horsehair if not. Quilts carry smoke, soap, and years. Beds may be shared. Rooms may be cold, yet exhaustion is a persuasive architect. The body learns where to sink before sleep takes you fully. Thoughts drift toward larger things without trying too hard to become profound. Progress, the future, new machines, railroads, opportunity, worry, whether children will have easier lives or merely different burdens, whether the town is growing or emptying, whether the last bad winter will repeat, whether health will hold, whether the saved money in the drawer will become something larger or evaporate into boots and medicine. Hope in 1880 often wears practical clothes. It does not usually arrive as grand ambition. It arrives as, perhaps we can repair instead of replace. Perhaps the child can stay in school one more season. Perhaps the cough is only a cough. Perhaps the next year will be better. Perhaps the new rail line will help. Perhaps it will ruin everything. Hope and worry share a bed in this century, and neither one is inclined to leave. And still, the night has its own authority. It lowers the volume on opinion. It reduces the visible world to what matters nearest. The lamp glows small and steady. The boards settle. Outside sounds thin to a dog bark, a passing wheel, the hush between gusts. Inside, the house rearranges itself around sleep. One last sip of water. One last check on embers. One last whispered instruction about morning. Then blankets rise, bodies turn, and the long, ordinary labor of rest begins. What strikes you most, perhaps, is how complete the day feels without ever once becoming grand. No single moment demanded to be remembered forever, and yet every moment mattered because each one was necessary. Health tended where possible, food preserved and made useful, leisure borrowed gently from labor, light managed, safety prepared, the body brought, at last, toward stillness. You lie down with the faint smell of smoke still in your hair and the memory of the day's work in your hands. Muscles ache, but not accusingly. The pillow is imperfect. The mattress has opinions. The room holds traces of other breathing, and somehow all of it is enough. Enough for the mind to let go. Enough for the shoulders to unclench. Enough for the house to become, for a few hours, a small vessel floating in the dark with everyone inside it, carried by the same ancient hope. That morning will come, that the latch will hold, that the embers will wake again, and that this long, plain, ordinary life, with all its labor and limits, will continue one more day. The light lowers further. The voices disappear into breathing. Somewhere in the dark, tomorrow is already assembling its demands. But tonight it can wait. Tonight the house has done what it could. So have you. And as sleep comes gently over the threshold, it feels less like escape than permission. Permission to stop counting, stop carrying, stop deciding, and let the long patient century grow quiet around you. The evening settles more fully now, and with it comes the gentler part of the day. Though gentle in 1880, America still means watchful, still means practical, still means that even rest must be prepared for. The work shirt remains on your back. Smoke lingers in the cloth. Your hands remember the shape of tools even after the tools have been set down. Yet something changes when the lamp is turned lower and the room stops belonging to labor alone. This is often the hour when faith becomes visible. Not always in a church, not always through a sermon, but through the way people speak when daylight can no longer do the comforting for them. A woman setting down a bow says she is thankful the weather held. A man rubbing his wrist says, with a small, tired smile, that if the Lord is willing, tomorrow may be a little easier. Though both of you know tomorrow rarely takes advice. Someone mentions a sick neighbor, and the response is immediate, not dramatic, just practical. Broth should be sent. Someone should call in the morning. The children should not be left without bread. Religion in this world behaves less like thunder and more like stitching. It runs quietly through ordinary life and keeps difficult things from pulling too far apart. On Sundays, it grows more formal. Clothes are brushed carefully. Children are scrubbed into temporary respectability. Boots are wiped. Faces are set into patient expressions. Church buildings vary, but the feeling inside them is often familiar. Hard benches, lamp smoke, damp wool, hymns rising a little flat and a little brave. Some people listen to the sermon with real hunger. Others attend because attendance itself is a form of belonging. To be seen in church is to remain inside the circle. Children learn that rhythm early. When to bow the head, when to fold the hands, when to sit still even if their knees have no intention of cooperating. Moral lessons come through repetition more than explanation. The room itself teaches them the silence, the standing, the watching. Historians still argue about whether this kind of religious structure deepened kindness or mainly trained obedience. Honestly, it probably did both, depending on the house, the preacher, the season, and the child. As the evening goes on, faith blends into another force that shapes the era almost as quietly, and that is news. Information in 1880 reaches you slowly enough that it can still gather dust and opinion before it arrives. A newspaper folded on the table may carry reports from Washington, labor troubles in another state, accidents on the rail line, prices in distant markets, and advertisements promising relief from every misery except low wages. Yet once those printed words enter a room like this, they stop being mere reports. They become conversation. Someone reads aloud. Another interrupts to say that sounds exaggerated. A third insists a cousin heard the same thing from a conductor, and therefore it must be true. National events drift through the room, but local events land with more force. A fire 2 streets over. A new family moving in. Trouble at the mill. A poor harvest. These things change the next morning. Congress often does not. Rumor lives in the spaces between facts. It travels by train, by foot, by memory, by exaggeration. By the time it reaches you, it may already be wearing someone else's certainty. You learn to listen for tone as much as detail. Trust is often local. A respected neighbor's reading of events can outweigh a printed article from a city printer who does not know your road, your winter, your prices, your church, your landlord, or your local troubles. And from news, it is only a short step to law, because in this century, order is not something distant. It is personal. In a small town, the sheriff is not an idea. He is a man whose habits are known, whose temper is discussed, whose loyalties are quietly measured. Justice often feels local long before it feels formal. Reputation matters nearly as much as statute. A person known to pay debts, show up on time, and keep from stirring quarrels carries a kind of invisible credit. A person known for drink, disorder, or dishonesty enters every room already weighed. In cities, the structure grows more complex. Police forces expand, but trust in them does not always keep pace. Enforcement changes with neighborhood, with class, with who is watching, with race. A warning might settle one matter, while another person is dragged farther for less. Everyone knows this, even when no one says it cleanly. The courthouse stands firm and symbolic, but most daily order is still negotiated closer to home. Employers settle disputes. Neighbors intervene. Families decide what can be forgiven and what must be remembered. That is where race enters the room as well, because race in 1880 America shapes daily life constantly, even when people pretend it is just the natural arrangement of things. You feel it in where people sit, where they work, which door is used, who is interrupted, who must speak carefully, who can afford not to. For Black Americans, especially in the South, freedom exists more securely in law than in safety. Ordinary errands may require a layer of calculation others do not have to spend. Which road? Which store? Which employer? Which tone of voice? Which glance to avoid holding too long? In the North, the structure shifts, but it does not vanish. Exclusion still works through custom, work, housing, and opportunity. Indigenous people are pushed outward. Chinese laborers face open hostility. New immigrants discover quickly that some accents are treated as useful and others as suspect. Children learn these divisions with troubling speed. They notice everything. Who may interrupt? Who must wait? Who receives kindness? Who receives scrutiny? Small gestures of solidarity happen, yes, and they matter. But they do not erase the larger weight pressing on the century. By now, the weather has begun another kind of lesson outside. Weather in 1880 is not background scenery. It is authority. It enters plans without knocking. Heat slows bodies, darkens collars, and makes every enclosed room feel narrower. Cold sharpens everything. Fingers stiffen. Breath shortens. Floors punish bare feet. Rain can undo a day's movement in an hour, turning roads to mud and intention to delay. Wind finds the cracks in a house and reminds you that shelter is a negotiation, not a guarantee. People talk about weather constantly because weather deserves attention. It justifies delay. It opens conversation. It explains worry. It decides what can be moved, planted, repaired, saved, or postponed. Even indoors, the structure answers to it. Boards creak. Doors swell. Windows rattle. Smoke draws badly or too fast. The house itself seems to have opinions about the season. And now the room grows smaller in the best way. The newspaper is folded. The law, the weather, the nation. The whole noisy, unfinished century begins to move farther from the lamp. Faith remains like a low, steady note beneath everything. A child asks a sleepy question from the doorway. Someone answers without lifting their head. A chair is nudged back into place. The kettle settles. Outside, the weather presses its forehead to the dark. This is where the day begins to exhale. Not because life is suddenly simpler, but because for a few hours, the hardest edges have dulled. News will wait until morning. Trouble will also wait. Or it will not. But you cannot solve it in this light. The wider country keeps remaking itself beyond your window. But here, in this ordinary room, what matters is smaller and more immediate. The latch, the lamp, the warmth left in the stove, the people under this roof, the fact that for one more night, ordinary life has managed to gather itself back together. If you were standing here with me, you would notice one more thing. How all these larger forces, faith, law, weather, race, news, do not arrive separately in real life. They overlap in the same room. The man who reads the paper may also be the man watching the sky for rain. The woman who promises broth to a sick neighbor may also be the one carrying the harder half of belief inside her without ever naming it. The child learning to bow a head in church may also be learning, far too early, who is safe to speak freely around and who is not. That is the strange heaviness of an ordinary evening in this era. Nothing seems grand while you are living it. Yet every small act is crowded with the wider country. So the room becomes a kind of shelter against all that pressure. Not a perfect shelter. Just enough. Enough light to see the face across from you. Enough warmth left in the stove to quiet the chill. Enough trust to share the news. And enough caution to know when to stop talking. In that narrow, flickering circle, the century pauses. Just briefly, long enough for the evening to hand itself over to night. Good night.